Ledger is a writing podcast and a draft that we're all rewriting together. Welcome to the show. I am your host, Austin Wilson. And you know what? In October, one morning, I was at the Austin Film Festival in Texas. I was sitting having my coffee at the hotel coffee bar, and I saw a guy with a Michigan pullover on. I was a guy from Indiana who loves Michigan. I go up there a lot. I love a handful of bookstores up there so much that I'll drive to those bookstores specifically. That'll be the entire reason I go up there. And I thought, hey, I'm from Indiana. I like Michigan. Maybe I'll chat with this dude. So I said, hey, are you from Michigan? Or are you just a fan of the football team? And turned out that guy was screenwriter Jim Burnstein, who is also the John H. Mitchell Professor of Entertainment and the director of the screenwriting program at the University of Michigan, as well as the writer of films like Renaissance Man, that stars Danny DeVito and was directed by Penny Marhsall. He also wrote Mighty Ducks 3, a particular childhood favorite of mine, and a lot more that he's done. So, one message you can take away from all this is, hey, just talk to people, see what happens. So I talked to Jim. We had a cool conversation. We chatted about football. We chatted about screenwriting. And in that conversation, I said, you should come on my podcast and talk about writing with me. And he said, okay, which is how we are here right now. He stopped by to chat about how he became a successful screenwriter without moving to LA and staying in Plymouth, Michigan, and specifically doing that in the 80s and the 90s and what that process looked and felt like to him. He also talks about the one thing you should never say as a writer and how one time he did, in fact, say that thing to beloved actor and total comic book nerd, like for real, look that up, Ed Asner. And also he talks about what turnaround is and what that feels like to a writer and also what it means to have people on your side, even if it's just one person. Also, he gave some book recommendations both in the show and then after the show while we were exchanging emails. And I have a list of the books that are awesome resources for screenwriters. I have that linked in the show notes, and I'll probably post about those on my Instagram account. Jim has a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, a lot of insight into what it's like to be a working screenwriter. And I really hope to have him back on at some point because I could seriously chat with him a real long time about a lot of different things. Right now, in this time, in 2024, we have more information and resources than we ever have before when it comes to learning in general, but also specifically learning screenwriting. And Jim is one of those resources. I learned a ton from this chat with him, and I hope now that you do too. As for me, go to austinrwilson.com to check out my work. You can read free fiction there. You can download print or digital copies of my story, Dynasty of Blood, which is currently coming out in serialized portions. You can also go to mosshartbooks.com to check out my independent bookstore, which just launched in November. I sell books online. I haven't gotten shipping internationally or even throughout the United States figured out yet, but that is coming. So check out mosshartbooks.com, check out my Instagram, mosshartbooks, and shoot me a message either through my website, austinrwilson.com, the Instagram, mosshartbooks, or the website, mosshartbooks.com. Let me know what you think of my stuff, the show. If there's a writer out there you'd like to hear on the show, just let me know. Tell me what you think of this stuff. I'm always looking to hear from people who have listened or who just love writing and want to chat. But as for now, here is my chat with screenwriter Jim Burnstein. One thing jumped out at me in your bio at the University of Michigan, which is that you beat the odds and made it as a successful screenwriter without moving from your home in Plymouth, Michigan. So I really want to talk about first this idea of place and setting, not just in the stuff that we write, but also very literally where we are sitting when we write. And I kind of want to talk to you about the importance of you writing from Plymouth, Michigan, and you writing from that state and not being a quote unquote LA guy. Tell me a little bit about that and how it's played into your craft.
Well, it started, it wasn't as much a choice as the fact that I lived here, right?
Right.
And I had, I knew nothing about how the industry worked.
Yeah.
But I just figured, you write your way in, right? And so I just started back when I first started, that TV movies looked like the, the easiest way in. I thought, foolishly, I thought, well, any idiot can do that. And then I, and then I tried, and I had one, everybody knows one person who knows one person.
Right.
And I had there's a wing of my family, my oldest first cousin, Mike Schiff, had moved to LA after graduating from University of Michigan Law School. And back then, everything, as Sal Bello said, that wasn't screwed down slid to the West Coast.
Right.
So, but he was screwed down. But he went there, and he became a lawyer. And his friend and client he represented was Ed Asner.
Oh, nice.
And Ed was, I saw him on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. It was my early 20s. And I said, well, I should write an episode of the Mary Tyler Moore Show. That was the first thing. And so I sent it out there. My timing was impeccable because that was their last season. And so but he said, he's going to have this new show that is going to spin off the Lou Grant character into a dramatic series. And I was going, oh, comic character, dramatic series. Wow. He said, watch it and come up with something. So my cousin, so I watched it, and I came up with a treatment for an episode that involved a strike among the journalists.
Yeah.
Because this had just happened in Detroit, where there was a long walkout. And I thought, well, what happens if you're Ed and you're the boss, you're Lou Grant, and you're the boss, and your friends are on the other side?
That's a good idea.
How does that work, right?
Yeah.
So I sent that in, and one night in my home, and we just bought in Plymouth, Michigan, my first home, I got a call from Alan Burns and Seth Freeman, who, were the head writers for the Lou Grant Show. And they told me that Ed loved my treatment and didn't understand why they couldn't use it, that they only used their staff, who were all in the guild, and I wasn't.
Yeah.
And so they said, if you will help us get Ed off our back, we'll point you in the right direction. Come on out here and I said, great. I was so happy. Wow. These guys, I mean, I was mostly Seth I was talking to, but God, Alan Burns and Brooks, oh my God, calling me at home in Plymouth.
Right.
Oh boy. So I went out there, met Ed. He was great. Watched him tape the show, and then sat down with Seth and another. I remember seeing Gary David Goldberg there. I'm sure of it, when he was just a young writer before he went to Family Ties.
Yeah.
If memory serves, I know I met him, and I'm pretty sure it was there. And they said, don't try to write what we're writing. Come up with something of your own. At which point I said, oh, you mean like a TV movie? And they said, yeah.
Yeah.
And so then I went to Ed and I said, if I write something, a TV movie for you to star in, will you read it? Yeah, I'll read it. So that's where I sent him my very first TV movie ever. And he looked at it and, he called me and he basically said it was crap in a Lou Grant type of way.
Sure.
And I said, well, you see what I was trying to do here, and that's, you never say that as a writer, what I was trying to do, but I didn't know. So I kept saying that. He said, well, I must be a fucking dope because I don't get any of that.
Well, that's got to be an all-timer as far as phone calls go.
Yeah. So I said, okay, I'm going to rewrite it. And I did, and it was much better. And he said, he'd show it to his agent or to an agent who, might want to represent me. He didn't. And so nothing really happened with that. So then I wrote a second one that I wish it was based on a newspaper story I did for Detroit Free Press magazine about this great, oh my God, he was the most inspirational figure in education I had ever met. This guy named Joe Doolin, who he was the first Black coach of a basketball team in Iowa. He then, in the wake of the riots in 1967 in Detroit, they hired him to come to the inner city of Detroit to take over this Catholic high school that was half white and half black, and a really tense thing, and brought him in. He changed the name of the school to St. Martin de Porres, and with using the style that he learned in Iowa, where he's kind of a legendary teacher, he made this school amazing. Right? He was in Time magazine. And then when the Catholic Church wanted to shut down inner city schools to save money, he was head of the National Black Catholic Association. He padlocked the church, saying close churches, not schools. Right? And so then, but in his late 30s, he had a heart attack. And then in Ann Arbor, there was this stabbing in high school of one kid on another kid. And they exiled them to this Devil's Island out in Pittsfield Township in this closed elementary school where they took the most dangerous kids in Ann Arbor and put them in this place that was far away. And the new superintendent called Joe and said, look, this thing is going to be a disaster. I need you to come in here, make this thing work. And he'd already had a heart attack like at age 39 when he was doing the Detroit stuff. But so here he comes, and he comes in, and he had these kids, and he did one of the most brilliant things any educator I know has ever done. The name of the school was called the Ann Arbor Center for Disruptive Youth. And so he said to them, this is the name they've given you.
Yeah.
Now, you're going to give yourself a name. Take the teachers out. Tell us when you've got a name. So they came back and they called it the Roberto Clemente School. That's how I heard about it on the radio. I said, what do they do? Train right fielders there? That's why I went and did the story. And what he did was he said, that's a great name.
Yeah.
Now that man died delivering relief supplies in the wake of the earthquake in what I think it was Nicaragua, Guatemala, whatever country it was.
Yeah.
In South America, Latin America. And he said, you will not defame that man's name. You're going to live up to it. You're not going to live down to that other name. And it worked. And soon you had kids who weren't disruptive youths trying to find their way out into this place to get in. And he took them, they were handicapped, they were this, they were that, and they came. And then they finally built him his own school there, and he became head of. I mean, he was just a legend. And so, if you remember the movie about Joe Clark, the guy with the baseball bat, Doolin was the exact opposite. Everybody, called him Daddy Doolin, and he would make home visits. He would go to all the kids' houses. He knew all the parents. He was just, he was beyond inspirational.
Right.
So I tried, and people liked it, but I didn't really get how to structure it, and finally, I moved on. I kept trying, and I'd get it out there, and she said she was an agent, but I'm not sure she was. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then I wrote a TV movie about one of my best friends who dropped out of the University of Michigan after 2 years. He was there when I was there. And at the end of his sophomore year, his parents thought he was going to be a doctor, but instead he went to Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Conn College. And he said, I could go to Ringling for 6 weeks and learn how to become a clown, or I could go to the University of Michigan for another 2 years and learn to become a clown.
That's a good line.
Yeah. So he went. And he was very talented. He was in a lot of different ways, great writer, great performer, but he didn't want to become like a dumb Ringling clown,
Sure.
He wanted to become a clown like in the great European tradition where they're theatrical performers.
Yeah.
Like Grok. And so, but he lived the life for a couple years, traveling up and down with the circus, this European circus. And, you talk about people running, and his best friend and one of my best friends joined him because what the hell, this sounds like fun.
Oh yeah. That's a memory.
And so they led this life, and then he came back, and he was writing first novel, and he came back to Michigan and developed this act. And he went to this place called Gino's Surf Lounge where he was going to perform it. They laughed him off the stage.
Sure.
Get him out of here. His girlfriend broke up with him. His dog got run over. His life was, his novels rejected by everybody. He was cratering. And so to get away from himself, he went to volunteer at this school, at the Detroit Orthogenic Center. He had no idea what it was. And this is at a time before people even knew the word autism.
Yeah.
Way before Rain Man and all that stuff. So he goes in there and he volunteers with, there's one kid there who nobody can control. He's like 5 years old. If Rain Man's on one end, he's on the other.
Yeah.
Run around in circles, bite his arm till it bleeds, bang his head against the wall, do all this thing. And he wanted to be with this kid. And the people at the school was, okay, nobody else does.
Yeah,
so he would go in there and just be in a room with them. And if the kid banged his head against the wall, he did too. If he bit his eye, he just copied everything he did. And people were worried about, my friend, just like,
sure.
What's he doing?
Yeah.
And then at a certain point, he's taking a breath on the floor and sitting on his hands, that kind of point. He looks up and the kid's imitating him. And now he reverses the game.
Yeah.
Kid had never spoken a word, got him to speak his first words. His mother and father had never heard him say the word mommy or daddy, got him to do that. And meanwhile, his act, Buffo, he started to take on, it was a combination of him and that kid, the personality. And he performed at this place called the Raven Gallery, where a lot of famous folk singers and singers, comedians played. People like Odetta, Josh White Jr., Pat Paulson, I think Steve Martin played there. And he just became an amazing hit.
Yeah.
While the act is taking off. And then there were people who said he was doing college tours, coming back working with a kid, but they said, you got to move out to California. You got to move out there. He was on the kind of Merv Griffin show. He was doing all this stuff. But the question was, at a certain point, he was making so much progress with the kid that the head of the school wanted to write a book about how this was working.
Yeah.
Or does he move to LA and pursue his career? And he moved to LA.
Yeah.
And it was like saying goodbye to the kid was really hard. But I wrote that story. And, living in Michigan, Plymouth, Michigan, they were making a TV movie right up the street from me on my block called Word of Honor with Carl Malden and Ron Silver. And I knew the woman because I had written something for the woman she was a producer, an actress, but she handled all the Michigan film projects, sort of the liaison. So she invited me to the set where I met Ron Silver and Mel Damsky, the director. They talked to me and they said, okay, they wanted to read what I'd written. So I sent them that. They sent them to a young agent I knew. Now I was at a real agency. They liked it. I flew out to LA, went to my first Hollywood party at the director's house. And there was, I just remember Gina Davis and Jeff Goldblum came in. And I thought, wow, this is Hollywood, man.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. But what happened was that script flew through the system. I mean, it was, and I'd only been doing this like 2 or 3 years writing those TV movies. And Raystar Productions optioned it, and it went to CBS, Columbia Pictures Television at CBS, and they were making it with Timothy Hutton starring right after Ordinary People. Buzz Kulick, who directed Brian's Song, directing it, did all the rewrites. We were 2 weeks away from principal photography. Office opened, and taps came out. Timothy Hutton signed a new representative in the legendary Sue Mengers. His old manager had kept assuring them that he was signing the contract, which I believe was the highest amount was ever going to be paid for a TV movie. And she said, no, he's a movie star. Won't do it. CBS got pissed.
Yeah.
They, they renewed the option, but they weren't going to do it. They pulled the plug. And I went from, this business is easy.
Right.
I've only been doing it that long. And I got the guy who did Brian's song on a direct. I said, this business is not hard.
Yeah.
To, oh my God, all my friends are asking, so when's it coming out?
Yep.
And I'm like, you can't explain to them. It's like, now they think everything you said was bullshit.
Right. So that's one of my questions actually is about the outside perspective of what writing looks like versus what it is. And so reading your stuff and reading about what you had come out and when it came out. So like your film Renaissance Man, directed by Penny Marhsall, came out in 1994.
Right.
And then your next credit is Mighty Ducks 3, which came out 2 years later.
Yep.
And my question is, well, I have a lot of questions based on all the stuff we just talked about, but this is the one I'm going to get to first. What does that 2 years look like to you as the writer of those two projects versus the outside perspective? Because for me, it's like, okay, if I'm looking at someone's credits, that movie came out in 94, that movie came out in 96. But I, as a writer, and you as a writer, know that it wasn't like there was a gap of 2 years and nothing was going on. So what's it look like to the writer? But on those two, specifically for Renaissance Man and Mighty Ducks 3, what's it look like behind the scenes to Jim Burnstein, the writer who's involved in those two projects?
Well, what it looks like is if you get a movie made with Penny Marhsall directing, and part of your deal is you've agreed to write your next movie for Disney.
Yeah.
Your life is suddenly easy. But the answer to your question is not what those 2 years look like, but what the 10 years up to that look like.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So if the plug is pulled on Learn to Fall in 1982, and this goes back to your initial question of, why Plymouth? People told me, you can't make it unless you move out here. And I said, well, I know that's true, except a good friend of mine got nominated for an Academy Award for his first screenplay, Kurt Ludke for Absence of Malice, and he virtually never goes to LA. And it was because I met him right when he was writing Absence of Malice, and I had finished writing Learn to Fall. Everything was going up. Oh yeah, he's getting an Academy Award, and I'm going down the toilet.
Yeah.
And that he said to me, what this is really the answer to the question. He said to me at a party soon after I was cratering, he said, look, as long as you're not going to get paid, why don't you not get paid more? And I was so drunk, I understood him. Stop writing TV movies, write a feature.
Yeah.
And that's where he said, do you ever think about writing about your experience, which I was still doing, teaching Shakespeare to the military?
Yeah.
I said, yeah, I thought about it. And he said, well, come up with a treatment, and if I like it, I'll option it and you'll be able to write it. And I said, nah, we're friends, Kurt. I don't want your charity. And he said, well, you're an idiot. And then
he's a good friend.
I went home, and the next morning, the roof, I don't know, it's leaking into my house.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I call Kurt up and I said, I'm an idiot. And that's where everything that allowed me to stay in Plymouth and write comes from. I came up with a treatment for Renaissance Man. I wrote the first draft. He said it. He said it. This is not right. This is crap.
Yeah.
I rewrote it. He said, you clearly don't know how to rewrite. Then I wrote it a third time where I went up. After the second time, I went up to spend a weekend at his place in northern Michigan, on Lake Michigan. And I watched him take apart my screenplay, and he could think out loud. And I watched what he was doing. And I kept saying, slow down, slow down, slow down. Because I was watching how a screenwriter thinks, right?
Yeah.
Everything's in the moment, setting up what's to come. And I'm like, okay, this is my MFA program or whatever.
Yeah.
Then I wrote the third draft, and he said, best compliment I ever received. Better than any check, better than any producer telling me how much they love my script. He said, this isn't all bad. And when that guy who was the head of a newspaper, he was Lou Grant. He was the executive editor, had won a Pulitzer Prize, Are not all bad? Wow. Fourth draft, I wrote, he said, I think we've gone as far as your talent will carry us. Now let's get it out there.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. And I did. And as a result of that, taking four drafts over 3 years, sending it out in end of 1986
Yeah.
to my young agent in LA, who had done nothing for me since then. But then he did a great thing because he decided he wasn't a good agent, and he went to go work for Ronnie Howard at Imagine in development. But he put my draft of Renaissance Man on his boss's desk. And the name of the agency was Robinson, Weintraub and Gross, and Stu Robinson called me. This is the Michigan part. He said, I don't know who you are or where you live. Is it Chicago? And I said, that's close enough.
Close.
And he said, there's not an ounce of fat on this script. From now on, I represent you.
Oh, nice.
It might take me 2 years. I guarantee you I will sell this project. There was a writer's strike in that 2 years, but he didn't know who I was. I know who he was. I'm smart enough to get on a plane.
Yep.
And I go to LA at, early 87. And he takes me to lunch and he says, what do you want to do? You want to move out here? I'll get you a lot of meetings. Or are you going to stay back there in Michigan and swing for the fences? Again, that's the Plymouth question. And I looked at him and I thought to myself, do I tell the truth or do I lie? But he looked so much like my dad when my dad was younger. I could not lie. And I said, I can't, my wife's not going to leave her job. I can't afford my house out here. He said, I don't care. He represents John Sayles. He said, John doesn't live in California. All I ask is if I tell you to get on a plane for a meeting, you're going to do it. And I said, hell yes, it's a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
And so, and that's it. And it took him almost 2 years to sell it.
Yeah.
But it got me my first job. People liked the script. I got a job adapting a book for Michael Douglas's company. So I was in the Guild in 1989. And so, it took, but getting a movie made is impossible. I mean,
oh yeah, it's a miracle.
And that's exactly what Stu told me. So when my first deal on Renaissance Man was at Fox. So, okay, that's in 1990. And I had a 2-draft deal, had basically same idea, but start over the way the producer Sarah Carlton wanted to go. And she had really good notes and she had a really good take on how it would be based on, my experience. I had originally set it in the Air Force, but because I taught every branch of the service. Where I taught is a unique base.
Yeah.
One of only 2 in the world where every service is. So then we changed it to the Army. We made them younger. I was the younger one. They were older. Now I was older. They were younger, or the character based on me, and had to come up with the characters who would be in the. She asked me, "Are you willing to make changes?" When I first met her, flew out to meet her at Fox, and are you willing to make changes? And I thought, here it comes. It was Shakespeare to soldiers. It's going to be Neil Simon.
Yeah. And
she said, this is really about teaching Shakespeare to soldiers, isn't it? And I went, yeah. And she said, that love story you've got in there, you thought you needed that for commercial reasons. And I went, pretty much.
Sure.
Let's just make it what it is. And I would have said yes to anything after that. So she said, I think we can make a deal. I flew home and I was flying back on Fox's dime within weeks.
Yeah.
Made the deal. I came out. She told me the game plan. And she said, come up. We'll meet again tomorrow morning. Tell me who the characters are going to be, who the students are, the Army people. Good. We're going to set it during basic training. Went to the hotel that night, took out a legal pad. Came in the next morning, read her the characters. And she looked at me strange. She said, when did you do that? And I said, well, last night. Isn't that what you asked me to do?
You asked me to do this.
And she said, well, yeah, but nobody does it. And I literally said, I'm from Michigan. I don't know any better. And I think I'd won her confidence then.
Yeah.
So then after 2 drafts, and I have to admit, draft 6 was maybe as good as draft 4, but no better. But she said, their 1.5-year option will be up soon enough. And then we'll go from there. And then she did something that producers don't do. She optioned it out of her own pocket. She took it to Touchstone, and then Touchstone wanted it. But now you've got to go through turnaround.
Yep.
And your audience, I'm sure, knows what turnaround is. It's where one studio buys another studio's unwanted stepchild or whatever.
A question I had planned later is I'm going to ask you what certain things feel like as a writer, and turnaround was one of them.
Yeah. And it feels like, because if you don't know it exists,
Right.
and then you hear how the negotiations are going so poorly because Fox wants way more than they paid you to write it. And I'm going, what? Don't pay.
Right. Don't do that.
It's really crazy. And then they make a deal with Touchstone at Disney. And then Touchstone starts negotiations with Stu. And he tells them up front, at the end of the day, I don't want all of you in the jacuzzi while Jim's taking a cold shower.
Yep.
And they say, we paid so much for turnaround, it's the cold shower. And then he finally called me and said, listen, unless your mother is in an iron lung or something, you're not taking this deal. It's no deal is better than a bad deal. And I was having such flashbacks to Learn to Fall, my TV movie.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no, it's happening again.
Here it goes.
Here it goes. And I said, well, my wife is pregnant with our third child. Does that count? He said, not good enough. I said, okay, you do it. I'm not strong enough.
Yeah.
And then that was on a Friday. On Monday, I was out at Selfridge Air National Guard Base teaching the Monday before Thanksgiving. He had never called me there before. He got the number from my wife there. I get called down to the Army Ed office, and he said, oh, you'll never guess who just called me. I said, who? Well, had a touchdown. I think it was David Hoberman. It was. He asked me, what does he really want? And Stu said, I've told you what he really wants.
Yeah, this isn't a game.
Yeah, this is the minimum of our dignity. And he says, okay, I'll go talk to my people and see. And Stu said, what is he going to do? Look in the mirror?
Your people.
He is his people.
Right.
Called me back 5 minutes later and said, aren't you glad you listened to me? You got a deal. That's the value of the agent, right?
Yeah, right.
What? Man. And then I wrote draft 7 for Touchstone. They liked it. They made a list of directors. First one on Sarah's list was Penny Marhsall. And I was looking, okay, who's 2 through 10?
Right.
And she liked it. And then she wanted to meet with me, Sarah, and she said, I read it on a plane. It made me cry.
Oh, that's awesome.
And from then on, I was like, everybody, read it on a plane. You have to read my script on a plane, obviously. And she had a note for me, make it funnier. And Sarah said, that means a lot more than that. I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
And so I was competing with a couple other her projects, 2 others I know of. And the 8th draft was, man, that's the first time I started to feel kind of pressure.
Yeah.
But she liked it, got it made. And that is a game. When you're getting a movie made, even before it's made, your life changes.
Well, that's the other thing is getting a green light, and then the day principal photography starts.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the things where I was like, as a writer, getting a green light, I'm sure, because it hasn't happened for me yet, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
But those feelings, you said so much I want to cover. 3 drafts in 4 years, or maybe it was 4 drafts.
4 drafts in 3 years.
4 drafts in 3 years. But also just the idea of, and this kind of harkens back to that very first question of being in Michigan and not knowing what turnaround was. Like, you did all of this at a time when access to that information was so much harder to come by. And I was lucky enough to grow up like literally on the edge of a cornfield in Indiana. And I had access to information at a young enough age where I knew what turnaround was before I was 20, which is weird, but that's because everything had changed so much in between those like 10 to 15 years. between like late 80s, early 2000s. And so talk to me about, because you said the 10 years leading up to that movie, and not going to LA, especially at a time when there's kind of no one other than like your friend who got nominated for an Oscar, which is like, it would be easy to convince yourself like, well, that's the one guy, like that's the exception. Like, I'm not going to be the other person who lives in Michigan, which, by the way, if my listeners don't know, Jeff Daniels lives in Michigan too, and he's amazing.
Yep, that was the other example.
Yeah,
Yeah, but he's an actor, so that's different.
right.
But my friend Kurt Ludke, he won the Academy Award for his second Out of Africa. So, it was like, but at least when I didn't understand something,
Yeah.
I could call him
Oh, yeah.
and just say, translate, but really, I didn't know anything. I mean, it's amazing to me, the stuff I didn't know. I didn't know what arbitration was. I didn't know what turnaround was. I didn't know what I read my contract, and what I couldn't believe was that, because I had worked as a playwright, I learned to fall into a play during that 4-year period and had it produced. The head of the Pasadena Playhouse came to Michigan and did it. I workshopped at Pasadena Playhouse in LA. But I looked, and it said in the contract that Walt Disney was the author. And why is that? Because screenwriters do not own the copyright to their material when they sell it. We're the only ones. Best paid, but we do not have copyright to our own work.
Is there anyone who has that in their contract?
No.
They get never?
Never. Well, if it's an indie film and they don't go,
But if you're in the guild,
yeah, if you're in a guild, the guild, when it was first formed, it gave away that, and you're not getting it back.
that is. So I wonder. I had never really thought about that.
Yeah,
believe it or not.
Neither had I. But you read the contract and you're like, whoa. But every other when I worked in the theater, people would come up to me and say, could they change a comma? And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? But this is the difference, and this opens up a whole other thing. It makes no sense to me. Somewhere along the line, obviously early on, I mean, there's a really good book, The Writers and Their Guild, written by Miranda Banks, who's a professor at Loyola Marymount, that tells you the whole history of how this happened.
Well, I'm going to have to get that.
Yep. Definitely gets a great book. And if you think screenwriters are screwed, you just take a look at animation writers. They're not part of the guild because Walt Disney prevented that. They're in a different guild. They do not get residuals in the way that Writers Guild writers do. That was another word I didn't know.
Residuals. That's an important one.
I did not know the word residuals, but I also didn't know turnaround. I guess I saw that there was a bonus if it actually got first day of principal photography.
Yeah.
Your bonus shows up and it's like, wow, this is great. That was part of the contract. So now my contract's much better than I thought it was. But when they make the contract, you get the bonus. It's like nothing gets made. But when it does, it's a very pleasant kind of surprise that this stuff exists. And then you begin to appreciate the Writers Guild, because you started with, what does that 2 years look like?
Yeah.
Well, I'm coming back from the set of D3 in 95, summer of 95, and there's a green envelope from the Writers Guild that I think is the Writers Guild newsletter. I toss it in a pile to all this mail, and then I open it up and I see my first residual check for Renaissance. I can't believe it. I didn't know there was such a thing.
Yeah.
And if you were lucky to be where I was from 1994 to 2008, that golden age of residuals before streamers and stuff.
Yep.
It's a game changer.
Yeah, DVD I've seen. Well, there's a really famous clip going around of Matt Damon. I think he's on Howard Stern or somewhere talking about the disappearance of DVD and the destruction of residuals and how much of the pie it cut out of people's checks, because even if your theatrical run wasn't amazing, you still had DVD there.
Yep.
And streaming now has burnt that. And
Yep. That's part of the reality. And here's the thing.
yeah,
I mean, Variety even wrote an article about Renaissance Man after, and this was VHS,
yeah,
right? Then it was DVD.
yeah,
Was how Renaissance Man was supposed to be a back to school movie in the fall. That's what it was scheduled as. But it tested so well with test audiences, they decided it should be a summer blockbuster. And they moved it way up to early June, end of May. And, you're caught in that kind of like 1 week window. We opened in the top 4, but you can't move. And then the next week Speed's coming out. The next, you're just getting but the test scores were always insanely high. So from Cinescore. And so when it came out in Blockbusters and other video stores, which were huge then, it went crazy.
yeah.
And that was all good for me, right? But you can make this correlation easily enough. The fall of blockbusters, the rise of Marvel. Why? Without an aftermarket,
Yeah.
Hollywood doesn't exist. Where do you go next? International. International superheroes. You don't need language, right? And so a great book on that is Linda Obst, who recently died, great producer, Sleepless in Hollywood. She did Sleepless in Seattle. And she tells that story of how, the end of blockbusters and those stores, I believe there'll be another stream of revenue to come along that the streamers don't have, I hope. But it's a collision of culture. It is Northern California and technology versus Southern California and the studios, and the tech guys have been having their way. And that's what The Last Strike was about, right? AI and all.
Oh yeah, AI sort of tied into those things, the disappearance of certain revenue streams and the changing landscape of blockbusters and just cinema in general. As far as the kinds of writing that you're attracted to, those kinds of films, and the release of films like Renaissance Man or Ruffian or the other things that you've worked on, that's the other thing that Hollywood has absolutely changed is those movies.
Yep.
Now they're not going to get a summer release in theaters. They're going to go straight to streaming. And one of my friends and I have talked a lot about
Yep.
how movies disappear on streaming so easily. Like Netflix will say like, oh, here comes this new movie. And then what happens to it? And so how does that affect your writing as far as the things you're writing now? Are you still, it's such a weird thing to be like, are you still attracted to the types of films that you're attracted to? Because the other weird thing about being a screenwriter, or I guess any writer really, is that if you do want your stuff publicly released, there has to be a
Right.
business aspect to some of the stuff you're thinking about. Like, obviously you don't want to write.
Don't chase the market. You're 3 years behind it.
Yes. So, but you do have to kind of be like, is there a place for the, like, how do you approach those thoughts and that viewpoint when you're sitting down to write?
I put it all out of my head. I'm a believer in tell the best story you can and hope you find a producer who's as passionate about it as you are. Hope that, if for a young filmmaker today, hope you get into Sundance where there's still those people making movies for $1 million or $2 million, going to Sundance, getting a deal, getting a career. It happens. I'm watching it with my youngest son. He and his writing and directing partner there are other avenues today that didn't exist. The Blacklist, and that's the most democratizing thing. It's such a brilliant idea. I mean, the original
Yeah, it
draft
is.
was plenty brilliant anyways. Every production company and every studio has a script that they can't figure out why wasn't made, right? But it opens up to the whole world. You don't have to live in Hollywood. Put your thing on the blacklist, score high, get a shot. And my youngest son and his writing and directing partner, they got on to they scored high. They got invited to the blacklist lab. It would take 6 scripts a year, go up to Ojai, meet other writers. They took off. They met a writer who loved their script and got them a manager. And I mean, they're pretty close to getting it made, but they're getting a lot of attention and meetings, and getting to pitch things and getting asked if they're interested in this project or that. So I'm watching it happen and thinking, wow, that didn't exist.
Yeah.
And that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
So, I look for things like that to not just give me hope, but the young writers I teach, because I still see it. A great screenplay too is, if you want to write for TV, that's a great thing to have. Great sample.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, and this is another thing my friend and I talk about a lot, is, and for some reason, the horror genre is where you're seeing it a lot, like the Terrifier films by Damien Leone.
Yep.
Writing and directing them, owns it, and makes it for, I mean, it's the Blumhouse model, essentially. Yep. Make it for almost nothing, and then they make like quadruple what they are putting into them. And seeing those things and being like, knowing that there are still people out there who are like, well, I don't want to make that giant blockbuster thing anymore, or I'm not attracted to it, or there's some more fun to be had when you don't have to sign the contract where it's like, here you go, insert conglomerate here. And you're right, all those things didn't exist, and now I think that's the way to balance the idea of Hollywood having changed so much in theaters and streamers. I mean, that stuff does make me sad. I love going to the theaters, and I never ever want to stop. But there are a lot of awesome things that make it easy for writers now that there wasn't.
Right, and there are companies and producers who really believe in giving young talent or new talent their shot. I mean, like American Fiction, right?
Yeah.
First time writer director wins the Academy Award.
Yep.
And that's that mandate of T Street, Ryan Johnson's. So it's, I don't know what the world's going to look like when I'm done with my script.
Right.
I know that I tend to work with the same producers. I just finished an adaptation for a producer who did Love and Honor. So, hopefully it gets made. Life is good. If not, I love writing. So
that was another question then. And this is a topic I touch on kind of often is an unproduced screenplay, even one that gets optioned, let's say it gets optioned, is that a failure? If it's unproduced, do you view it as a failure? How do you?
Great question. Okay. So after I started teaching, I needed to work with a writing partner because I have to shut down 2 weeks in the fall and 2 weeks in the winter to grade screenplays. But
yeah.
And he's from LA. My older cousin, his youngest son, who was brought up in LA, Garrett Schiff. And I told him when I was coming out there and I started to see he was selling stuff. And I said, well, I'm going to find something for us. And I did. And we started writing together. People started asking us for as a team. But we sold a spec. I'm a big believer in the spec script. I've sold a lot of pitches. A big believer in the spec script. We sold a script in 2001 or 2001 in a bidding war between Sony and MGM. Mark Platt. I mean, we got a lot of money.
Yeah.
We had director attached. He did The Devil Wore Prada. I mean, he did it after.
Yeah.
We wrote a couple drafts for him. We're ready to make it. MGM goes bankrupt. Is that a failure?
Right.
No, not in an economic sense.
Right.
I still believe this in a couple of other scripts, a couple that I've never sold. I believe they'll be made.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll be in my lifetime, but I believe they'll be made. And I tell this, scripts do not have a shelf life. It's not milk. there's a reason why so many Academy Award winning scripts are 10, 12 years old.
Right.
And this is what my agent taught me before Stu, he went on to be one of the founders of Paradigm. I was one of the first clients at Paradigm. But he told me when Renaissance Man was made, what you said, every movie that's made is a miracle. And then he said, oh, and you want it good too? Now you're getting greedy. And there's some truth to that too.
Yeah.
You know, you gotta, I had a critic ask me one time on a script that was my second script called Me and Ali that I wrote while I was waiting for something to happen with Renaissance. And it's a really, I think it's a great script. A lot of people in LA thought it was a great script. He said, does it drive you crazy that you might never get to see it? And I said, oh, I've seen it. I saw it every day. I saw it in my head. And it got me through a very difficult time when a good friend in our neighborhood died in a tragic way. And it was just, it just helped me. Right.
Yeah.
But I don't ever regret writing it.
Yeah.
And that's, look, I'm no Van Gogh, but did he regret painting stuff that didn't get sold?
Right. No, I think that's a good way to think about it. And because I just like your computer or your file cabinet or whatever, filled with stuff that didn't get out there, didn't get made, didn't find the person who said yes or whatever. And I struggle with that sometimes and go back and forth with it, but landing on that, I think when I land somewhere else other than I don't regret doing it is when I would actually confront the idea that I maybe should just move on. But I kind of like, it's that thing again, my best friend and I, his name's David. I talk about him all the time because he's basically like my brother, but we always have that conversation about struggling with the thing we love and it being art, and always being like, well, what am I going to do? Quit? Like,
exactly.
No.
Exactly. No. And that's why, I can't tell you how big a fan I am of the Blacklist.
Yeah.
And I tell this to my students. I say, look, I know a lot of people. I have a lot of connections that is of no use to my kid as a writer. If I call those people up and say, oh, you got to read my kid's script, it's great, I know what they're thinking. They're thinking what I would think when they do that with me. It's like, oh shit, what if it's bad? Right? What am I going to tell them?
Yep.
He goes in the Blacklist, he goes and gets found, and nobody knew anything about him. I had no influence, and that's good.
Oh yeah, the strength of the writing. Put it first.
Yep.
That's the first thing.
Yep.
You said something about spec scripts right here as we're wrapping up. While I was at Austin Film Fest, I went to a panel where Alex Convery was speaking. He did that great movie. He wrote it, Air, with Damon and Affleck. Yeah. And he was talking about spec scripts specifically. And one of the things he said that I really took to heart for my own work is that you are not writing spec scripts to get made. You are writing them to get read. And I was curious what your thoughts are about that as someone who writes spec scripts and someone who has work that's produced. How often are you writing spec scripts, and what's your thought about that?
Well, my philosophy was always, for every script I was getting paid to do, like if the studio producers wanted me to write a script, I would turn around and invest in myself and write a spec, because you don't want to be that person who just, well, yeah, I can write a horror movie a year and make or whatever genre it is.
Yeah.
I have a friend or guy I know who writes superhero movies, and he always writes specs because he can afford to, obviously. But you can't. Yes, I think that's a really smart way of saying it. Your ticket of admission to the business is the script.
Yeah.
Don't think of it as being made yet, think of it as the key to getting in the game. And at that point, yeah, it's about being read. And when you get in Austin, on our panel, manager said, if you have written a great script and you leave it on a bus in LA, you forgot it there, and it's really great, oh, it'll be found. He said, what do you think people like me are doing? We're looking for that. People have made their careers. I know the guy worked on a movie with a guy who had found Juno.
Yeah.
Was one of the people who had. And it's like, that's the currency of the business, is the script.
Yeah.
So you're your own best judge of, if you are passionate about what you are doing, and if you really are happy with the way it turned out, then that's a good indicator that's going to be your shot.
Yep.
It's not, and I would say the biggest mistake people make is, I've had people say to me, I've written like 19 scripts and none of them got any traction. I said, yeah, you wrote 19 first drafts. You'd have been much better off rewriting the first one 19 times. It's not a lottery ticket. If you send out a script and you hope it's good, you're dead. If you know it's good, you got a shot.
Yeah. So there you have it. Don't ever say what I was trying to do here was, and if a friend says, actually, if anyone says, maybe not anyone, but if somebody says they're going to option your script, just say okay and then get to work. I learned a lot in this, like I said in the intro. Thank you so much to Jim for stopping by, talking with me about screenwriting and all kinds of stuff that we chatted about. Hope he can come back at some point. Let me know what you thought of the show. Go to austinrwilson.com or mosshartbooks.com or mosshartbooks on Instagram. Tell me what you thought about this episode, other episodes. Tell me what you're writing. Tell me if there's anyone you'd like to hear on the show. And watch out for another episode, which is coming up very quick. While I'm recording this outro, I'm also going to be preparing for an interview that I'm conducting tomorrow, one that had to get rescheduled due to illness. That one's going to be coming out almost exactly 5 or 6 days. We'll see about editing after this one is up. So heads up, another screenwriting conversation is coming your way. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you next time.